He swore on the bones of his first wife that no woman would ever sleep in their bed again. The young legionary, Corvus, spat onto the dirt road. Aelia, 20s, the peace bride, froze at the entrance of the general's formidable villa, the costly silks of her foreign homeland suddenly feeling thin and cheap. Her guard escort ignored the local chatter, pushing her forward. General Marcus Aquila, 40s, stood waiting on the portico, a figure of granite authority, his eyes registering neither welcome nor malice, just duty. The peace treaty was signed in blood, and this political marriage was the cold wax seal. Aelia was the proof of peace. Marcus was the price. General Marcus Aquila did not believe in comfort. His routine, honed over 2 decades of campaigning on the savage German frontier, was an engine of brutal efficiency. Dawn found him not in the silks of a provincial governor, but in the polished bronze of his segmented armor, reviewing the watchlogs from the previous night. His villa, strategically positioned on a ridge overlooking the newly pacified territory, was less a home and more a fortified barracks, every stone speaking of Roman law enforced by Roman steel. This morning, the formality of receiving Aelia had disrupted his usual first hour. Yet his reaction was only tighter discipline. He dismissed the weary centurion Vitterus with a sharp nod before turning back to the map table. The campaign had ended just 3 weeks prior with a decisive, bloody victory. Now came the hard part: administration, infrastructure, and the grim task of ensuring the defeated local tribes understood the permanence of Rome. He drew a finger across a proposed route for a new military road, marking the location of timber and labor allocations. His decisions were swift, logical, and absolute. They had to be. The stability of the entire frontier rested on his judgment. He was the legatus Augusti pro praetore, the emperor's hand, the ultimate authority. But that hand, steady as it was on the map, often felt the phantom weight of a different, softer touch. Marcus's public persona was flawless: the unyielding soldier, the stern administrator, the widower whose devotion to duty bordered on religious asceticism. The world knew he had lost his Roman wife, Livia, to a sickness 3 years ago, a loss mourned with the appropriate gravitas. What the world did not know was the secret pact he had made the night she was buried, that he would never allow vulnerability, and especially love, back into his heart. Love had made him weak, distracted, human. His grief had been a fissure through which ambition and duty had barely held him together. Now, there was only duty. He found temporary solace in the sterile order of his office. The smell of oiled leather and old parchment was familiar, comforting in its lack of emotional demand. He picked up a small, polished wooden soldier Livia had carved for their son Titus, before Titus had lost his life in a fever 2 years before Livia. The smooth toy fit perfectly in his palm. Titus, Livia. The 2 anchors of his life ripped away. This new wife, this Aelia, was nothing more than an exotic diplomatic seal. She would be housed, fed, and treated with respect due to her status, but she would never be touched. She was a living document, a transaction. He slammed the wooden soldier back onto the shelf. The sharp sound made a nearby scribe flinch. Marcus did not notice. He walked to the window, watching the movement of the sentries below. The sun was rising higher, illuminating the vastness of the territory he controlled, territory conquered at the expense of his own soul. He had traded happiness for history. That was the bargain he had struck with the gods, and he intended to keep his side of the oath. The arrival of the peace bride was an inconvenience, a necessary political theatre, but it would not crack the armor around his heart. Milo was not a Roman citizen, nor was he a slave. He was a libertus, a freedman, employed by Marcus Aquila's household staff, specifically charged with maintaining the general's horses and the integrity of the stables. His hands were permanently stained with sweat, manure, and the fine dust of the Roman road. His back ached with the perpetual stoop required for mucking stalls and polishing tack. Socially, he was lower than the lowest legionary, an invisible necessity. Milo, 30s, wiry, constantly moving, lived a life defined by exhaustion and the immediate needs of the animals under his care. He rarely saw the sun rise or set from outside the shadowed confines of the stable block. His limitations were clear. He possessed no political power, no wealth, and his voice carried the weight of a feather in a storm. Yet, he possessed an almost supernatural sensitivity to disruptions in the patterns of life around him, a necessary skill learned from years of noticing the subtle tremor of a horse before a panic, or the slight shift in the wind before a storm. What Milo protected was not a person, but a promise. The safety of a young stable hand named Lyra, 15, an orphaned local girl taken in by the kitchen staff, whom Milo had informally adopted after her family was displaced by the recent war. Lyra was the only light in his dim routine, a reminder of the soft, human connections Rome was so determined to crush beneath its heel. He taught her the silence of the stables, how to soothe a nervous charger, and most importantly, how to remain utterly unnoticed. This morning, the quiet vigilance that had kept him and Lyra safe was severely tested. The arrival of the foreign bride had brought an unsettling wave of opulence and nervous energy to the villa. The normal rhythm of the guard change was interrupted by the sudden posting of two new unfamiliar guards on the western perimeter, guards who wore the distinctive, expensive armor of the Praetorian Guard, not the common legionary issue. This itself was odd. Praetorians were rarely deployed this far into the provinces, unless the threat was immediate and directed at the emperor's personal interest. But the real disruption, the detail that had snagged Milo's quiet attention like a thorn, involved the bride's baggage train. While supervising the unloading, he had seen one of the foreign guards, a mountain of a man dressed in the subdued colors of Aelia's people, slip away from the main group. This man had carried not a trunk of silks, but a heavy, oilskin-wrapped container, and he had delivered it not to the general's private quarters, but to the small, rarely used armory shed near the aqueduct. The man had returned empty-handed, his face a mask of calculated neutrality. Milo had quickly inspected the area later under the pretense of checking for loose planks. The armory shed lock, a solid Roman mechanism, showed faint, fresh scratch marks, as if a very specific, foreign key had been used to access it, and then the original lock resecured. Milo knew two things instinctively. Praetorians meant danger, and a secret cache near the aqueduct meant sabotage. This was not merely the arrival of a peace bride. This was a seed of unrest planted deep within the general's own walls. He knew something was fundamentally wrong with this peace. Sabati did not yet understand the full scope of the treason being played out just feet from the general, who commanded the world he lived in. "Where are you watching from today?" The first crossing of their paths occurred not in the grand halls of the villa, but in the subdued morning light of the central courtyard, where the scent of rosemary clashed sharply with the unfamiliar, heavy perfume worn by Aelia. Marcus Aquila was conducting an inspection of a newly arrived cohort of auxiliary troops, a task demanding focused, objective scrutiny. He walked the ranks, his gaze sharp, assessing the strength and discipline of the men who formed the peripheral defenses of his command. Aelia, instructed by her nervous Roman attendants to take a morning constitutional to show her compliance and respect, walked slowly across the peristyle garden, escorted by two stiffly attentive Roman guards and her own foreign retainer, the hulking Gorok. She was dressed in Roman-style tunics now, mandated by the treaty, but the unfamiliar cut made her movements hesitant, almost mechanical. Her eyes, however, were intensely active, darting everywhere, taking in the unforgiving architecture, the relentless order, and the cold efficiency of the Roman war machine. Milo was moving large sacks of feed across the far end of the courtyard, his head down, concentrating on keeping the load balanced and staying out of the direct sightlines of the officers. He was practiced at being wallpaper, but his attention was snagged by the movement of Gorok, Aelia's towering retainer. Gorok seemed to be observing the auxiliary inspection with an unnatural intensity, not of interest, but of calculation. His eyes lingered on the placement of the sentry posts and the vulnerability of the main gate access points, movements that had nothing to do with ensuring his mistress's safety. As Marcus reached the end of the auxiliary line, he paused, giving a final instruction to the centurion, his voice carrying the authority of iron. He then glanced up, his eyes automatically sweeping his immediate environment, and they landed on Aelia. It was a purely functional look, assessing the asset. She was striking, certainly, with the fierce pride of her desert people tempered by an obvious, desperate restraint. He noted the way she held her chin, high but defensive, like a cornered beast refusing to drop its gaze. She was an object of political necessity, and his only emotion was a dull recognition of his heavy burden. Alia, sensing the weight of his stare, did not look away. She met his eyes for a brief, agonizing second. She saw the general, the deep lines of stress around his eyes, the absolute lack of warmth, the sheer mass of command he carried. But beneath the power, she caught something else, a flash of profound, contained sadness, like a river dammed too tightly. He looked not like a triumphant conqueror, but a man imprisoned by his own victories. The moment broke as Marcus turned sharply on his heel, signaling the end of the inspection. As he retreated into the shadows of the villa, Alia's gaze lingered not on him, but on Gorok, who was now subtly counting the number of barrels stacked near the kitchen stores, a strange fixation for a bodyguard. Milo, witnessing this brief interaction from his low position, saw the strange triangulation, the general's duty, the bride's defensive scrutiny, and the retainer's predatory calculation. He felt a deep, cold shiver of presentiment. The air around the villa was thick with stability, but Milo knew that stability was a mask. Something cold, hard, and utterly irreversible was moving beneath the surface. The sign was a scent, faint but distinct, lingering near the general's private study window late that afternoon. Marcus was occupied with the governor of the neighboring province, discussing tax levies, a conversation miles away from the mundane maintenance of his villa. Milo, meanwhile, was tasked with polishing the bronze fittings on the window shutters along the southern portico. He caught the scent first, a sharp metallic odor underlying the usual smells of stone and dust. It was not the scent of fresh iron, but of refined ore, specifically of the high-grade bronze used in complex mechanical devices, bronze that was clearly not of local Roman manufacture. He dismissed it at first. The foreign retinue had brought many strange tools. But then he noticed the stone. The foundation wall just below the study window, usually impeccable, had a single paving stone slightly misaligned. The mortar around it was infinitesimally newer, drier than the millennia-old dust that covered the rest of the structure. Someone had recently, and expertly, disturbed the wall. Milo knelt, pretending to check the lower shutter hinge. He ran his calloused finger along the joint of the stone. He felt the cold truth. The mortar had been carefully chipped and reapplied. This was not the work of hasty thieves, but of meticulous planning. The smell of refined bronze was stronger here. He realized the stone concealed a small, carefully sealed pocket in the wall, placed precisely below the general's study, the room where Marcus conducted all his sensitive correspondence and received crucial reports. A wave of icy dread washed over Milo. He was the Libertus, the stable hand. The Imperium was a massive, terrifying machine, and he was an insignificant cog. To see, to acknowledge, to even whisper about something like this was to invite the gaze of forces that could crush him, and worse, Lyra. He was protecting her, and action meant exposure. Ignorance meant safety. He stood up, wiping his hands on his worn tunic. His internal conflict was a visible tremor in his shoulders. If he spoke, who would listen? A freedman accusing a foreign dignitary, protected by a fragile peace treaty, of espionage within the general's private residence. He would be dismissed, potentially flogged, or branded a conspirator himself. Marcus Aquila saw loyalty in service, not in nervous, unfounded accusations. Yet the image of the Praetorian guards near the aqueduct, the strange oilskin package, and now this hidden compartment resonated with a single dangerous certainty. Alia's arrival was not merely a political marriage, it was a military operation of infiltration. If the general's secure quarters were compromised, the entire command structure could be at risk. This wasn't about treason in the abstract. This was about the imminent collapse of the Roman grip on the frontier. A collapse that would unleash renewed war, guaranteeing Lyra's destruction. Milo took a slow, deep breath, tasting the dust and the metallic scent. He turned away, completing his task on the shutters, appearing to be nothing more than the dutiful cleaner. He had to gather more proof. He couldn't risk Lyra's life on a misaligned stone and a strange odor, but the knowledge was now a heavy weight in his gut. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was walking on the edge of a precipice, and the true cost of peace was about to be paid. The setting sun cast long, deceptive shadows across the villa's courtyard. Milo could not wait for more proof. The opportunity would vanish once night watch began. He had witnessed Gorok, Ilya's retainer, making a subtle late-afternoon trip from the armory shed back towards the main villa, looking unnaturally calm. The time for deliberation was over. Milo knew he couldn't confront the general directly. The story would sound like the fevered rambling of an exhausted stable hand. He needed an unassailable conduit, someone loyal, efficient, and equally insignificant. He chose Viteris, the centurion Marcus had curtly dismissed earlier, a man driven by duty but constantly overlooked. Milo found Viteris supervising the evening inspection of the horses. He approached the centurion with careful deference, his back stooped, his manner radiating humble servitude. He waited until Viteris had finished shouting orders, and then cleared his throat softly. "Centurion Viteris, forgiveness for the interruption. I am Milo. I have served the general's horses for 5 years." Viteris, tired and smelling of sweat and leather, glanced at him dismissively. "Speak quickly, stable boy, I have men to post." Milo kept his voice low, steady, focusing on verifiable facts, stripping away his own interpretation. "The Praetorian guards near the aqueduct fence, Centurion. They patrol a dead space, and the bronze scent near the south study window, not the smell of the Legion." Viteris frowned, confusion replacing impatience. "What are you rambling about? The general knows where his guards are posted." "The lock on the auxiliary armory shed near the aqueduct." "Centurion," Milo pressed, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It was used this morning, not broken but opened, with an unfamiliar key then resecured. I checked the tumblers. And the paving stone below the study window." "Centurion." "It has been moved. It hides a cavity. I believe the foreign retainer, Gorok, is placing objects in the cavity and retrieving others from the armory." Viteris stared at him, his face suddenly taut. A non-citizen accusing a high-profile foreign official of high treason within the governor's residence. The penalty for false accusation could easily be death. Milo stood his ground, offering no pleas, no dramatic gestures, just the cold, hard details. "If I am wrong, Centurion, flog me, but if I am right, the general's secure intelligence is being siphoned out through that wall. And the items in the armory, they did not feel like parchment." The centurion studied the stable hand's exhausted, honest eyes. Viteris didn't believe in conspiracies, but he believed in the weariness of honest labor, and the details were too specific for a simple lie. He thought of the unusual guard posting. He thought of the peace that felt too easy, too brittle. Viteris nodded once, grimly. "Wait here, Libertus. If you have wasted my time, you will regret the day you left your stall." He turned and strode purposefully towards the villa entrance, his steps ringing against the stone. The history of the frontier now rested on the frail word of a stable hand and the professional suspicion of a weary centurion. Milo watched him go, feeling the silence of the courtyard press down on him. He had spoken. The risk was real. The normal operation of the Roman administration was now irreversibly interrupted. Viteris did not waste time with ceremony. He bypassed the usual aids and requested immediate audience, interrupting Marcus Aquila's late-evening reading of diplomatic dispatches. Marcus, accustomed to the slow cadence of provincial governance, received the centurion with cold impatience. "Centurion, your report had better warrant this breach of protocol," Marcus stated, not looking up from his parchment. Viteris did not flinch. "General, I report a potential and imminent threat of espionage, sourced from the new peace delegation, utilizing the south wall of your study. Details provided by a Libertus named Milo." Marcus looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to icy concentration. He knew Viteris was too rigid to entertain flights of fancy. "A stable hand. Explain the logic." Viteris laid out the facts as delivered by Milo: the tampered armory lock, the non-standard bronze odor, the recently reset paving stone, and the strange movements of the retainer, Gorok. Viteris concluded, his voice low, "The cavity beneath your window, General. It is too precise to be coincidence. If this is a relay point, they have been collecting intelligence since their arrival. The implications hit Marcus with the force of a cavalry charge. His personal study was where all military deployment plans, supply lines, and future campaign strategies were drafted, all secured behind supposed Roman stone and iron. If this foreign faction had access, the carefully won peace was a deception, designed only to gain critical time and information. The tribes were not pacified. They were preparing for a calculated uprising. Marcus stood up, shedding the mantle of the tired administrator instantly. The general re-emerged, sharp and lethal. Viterus, summon Optio Severus and 4 trusted men, no praetorians, no local cohort. Use only men from the old 9th Legion, men who answer only to me. Move with absolute silence. Secure the area around the aqueduct armory. If Gorok is there, apprehend him and bring him to the small interrogation room. No violence unless he resists. Marcus then grabbed his short sword and a thick, heavy lamp. I will handle the south wall. He moved with urgent precision towards the door of his study. He felt the sickening lurch of betrayal, not personal betrayal, but the betrayal of the very concept of Pax Romana. He had sacrificed his personal life for the stability of the empire, and now he realized the enemy had used that stability as their shield. His initial assessment of Aelia, the political necessity, had blinded him to the possibility of active, sophisticated treason. Reaching the exterior wall, Marcus slammed the heavy lamp down, illuminating the spot Viterus described. His eyes, trained by years of battlefield reconnaissance, immediately spotted the subtle discoloration of the mortar. He used the butt of his sword to strike the corner of the stone. It gave way with a soft, grinding sound, revealing a small, cylindrical cavity. Inside, wrapped tightly in oilskin, was a small, perfectly carved wooden tube. Marcus extracted the tube, his hands rock steady. He broke the wax seal. Inside was not parchment, but a tiny, compressed map, a detailed schematic of the villa's defenses, including the changing rotation of the few loyal 9th Legion men and, sickeningly, the exact placement of the general's personal guard during evening hours. The threat was immediate, tactical, and aimed directly at him. He secured the map and looked towards the gate. His jaw clenched tight. He had been played for a fool. Now he had to secure the threat before the whole frontier erupted in flames. His next move had to be surgical, quiet, and brutal. The confrontation took place not in the cold interrogation room, but in Aelia's lavishly appointed receiving chamber, moments after Marcus had received Viterus's hushed report. Gorok had been apprehended trying to destroy the contents of the armory, primarily signal flags and codes, intended for coordinated tribal attacks. Aelia was found sitting calmly, stitching an elaborate tapestry. The serenity was deliberate, a posture of compliant peace. The 2 Roman guards outside were abruptly dismissed by Marcus. He entered the room alone, the small, damning wooden tube held loosely in his hand. Aelia stood immediately, observing his rigid stance, the cold rage radiating off him. "General Aquila," she began, her voice carefully modulated, "has there been an issue with the supplies? You seem distressed." Marcus did not acknowledge the pretense. He dropped the wooden tube onto a low marble table. The sound was sharp in the silence. "The issue is not with supplies, Princess. It is with the brittle, filthy nature of your peace." Aelia's control faltered for a second, her eyes flicking towards the tube, registering recognition and panic, but she quickly recovered. "I do not understand. I am here as a symbol of fidelity to the treaty." "You are here as a spy, Aelia," Marcus stated, his voice flat, dangerously devoid of emotion. "Or rather the centerpiece of a sophisticated sabotage operation. That tube held the schematics of my own security protocols, prepared to guide your people to my throat. Your bodyguard, Gorok, is currently answering questions about the coded signal flags he was hiding in the armory." Aelia's facade finally cracked. She walked toward him, not in surrender, but in defiance. Her face, usually constrained by courtly obedience, was now etched with a desperate, wild pride. "And if it is true, General, what does it change? You took our land, slaughtered our warriors, and enforced a peace that starves our children. You call it order. We call it occupation. Did you truly believe we would simply accept the gilded cage you provided for your political wife? I believed in the sanctity of the oath, Marcus hissed, stepping closer. I believed that when an envoy comes in peace, they respect the terms you were given as a guarantee, Aelia. You swore allegiance to Rome. I swore allegiance to survival, she countered, the years of suppressed pain erupting. My people sent me, yes, but not to cement your victory. They sent me to ensure Rome pays a price for its arrogance. Gorok was relaying intelligence on your forces. If you fall, the legions fracture. Our chance for freedom is now, before the new roads are built and the conquest is permanent. Marcus saw not a spy, but a desperate queen sacrificing herself for her kingdom, echoing the duty that consumed his own life. The love and duty conflict he sought to avoid was suddenly embodied in this volatile, dangerous woman. Do you know the consequences? Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. For treason, for war initiated under the guise of peace. I will not only execute Gorok, Aelia, I will exterminate the entire tribal leadership, and your people will be enslaved for generations. Did you consider the cost of your freedom? Aelia stood perfectly still, meeting his gaze. We considered the cost of your peace, General, and we decided death with honor is cheaper. The lie of the peace was shattered. Now, Marcus faced a terrible choice: destroy his fragile political asset and ignite an immediate, costly war, or use this knowledge to crush the conspirators quietly, thereby endorsing the idea that Roman mercy was limitless. The fate of the frontier and his own soul hinged on his next command. The consequences were immediate and surgical. Marcus Aquila, driven by the map clutched in his fist, did not report the treason to Rome. Doing so would have triggered a political investigation and a public military purge, destroying the frontier's stability and validating Aelia's people's sacrifice. Instead, he chose the path of silent, ruthless efficiency. Gorok lost his life before dawn. Marcus oversaw the execution himself, an act designed to be terrifyingly discreet. No public spectacle, no martyrdom, just a single cold removal of the head of the serpent. The Praetorian guards complicit in the surveillance were quietly recalled to Rome under false charges of administrative incompetence. Their political careers ended. The message was clear to anyone watching. The general saw everything, and his judgment was final, swift and untraceable. The deepest rupture, however, occurred within the villa. Marcus confined Aelia to her chambers, not as a prisoner of war, but as a political asset whose value had dangerously shifted. She was the peace bride who had nearly sparked a renewed conflict, yet her lineage was still the foundation of the truce. He could not kill her without destroying the treaty entirely. He could not free her without risking renewed insurgency. She was condemned to silence and gilded isolation. He addressed Aelia only once more, hours after Gorok was gone. He stood at the threshold, keeping distance. Your sacrifice failed, Aelia. Your people were prepared to use you as a detonator. They risked your life for a momentary tactical advantage. That is not honor, that is desperation. Aelia sat on the edge of her elaborate bed, looking pale but resolute. They bought time, General. They showed us that your walls bleed. They showed me that my mercy is wasted, Marcus corrected, his eyes cold and hard. The consequences are yours alone. Your people live, for now, but they will know I possess their plot and their treachery. From this day forward, every Roman policy, every new law, every tax will be doubled in severity. They sought war. They will receive an occupation so complete, they will forget the taste of freedom. You traded a quick, clean war for a slow, suffocating subjugation, Aelia. That is your legacy. She flinched, the realization of her failure hitting harder than any blow. She had sacrificed her honor and her life for her people, only to secure their prolonged suffering. The price of truth, the truth that Rome could not be defeated by cunning but only by brute force, was devastating to both sides. Milo, the humble stable hand, was summoned by Viterus. He stood trembling before the centurion, expecting either a reward or a censure. Viterus simply handed him a small sealed purse of silver, enough to ensure Lyra's future for years. The general recognizes loyalty. Telepetus, he requires silence more than gold. Tell no one how you came by this. Tell no one what you saw. Milo felt the weight of the silver. His life was spared, his loyalty recognized, but the knowledge he carried was a brand. He walked back to the stables, rich but profoundly heavier. He had protected Lyra, but he had lost his ignorance, and the villa now felt less like a home and more like the cold, terrifying center of the Empire's vengeance. Months passed in the strained quiet that follows a deep, contained crisis. The frontier did not erupt. It merely groaned under the intensified burden of Marcus Aquila's new administration. He built the roads faster, demanded the tribute harder, ensuring the perceived peace was permanent, yet corrosive. The general, however, was subtly changed. The absolute conviction of his self-imposed isolation had fractured. He had been saved not by the power of his legions, but by the quiet vigilance of the most powerless man in his household. Marcus had stopped looking at Aelia with suspicion and started looking at her as the living embodiment of the enemy he understood, one bound by fierce, unyielding duty. He occasionally visited her chamber, not to interrogate but to challenge her political logic, to understand the desperation that fueled her people. They never spoke of love, only of power, duty, and sacrifice. The forbidden connection that had been intended to be a simple political seal was transforming into a strange, brutal shared respect, forged in the fire of mutual betrayal. One evening, Marcus found Aelia at the window, looking out over the Roman lights illuminating the newly built military road. He saw the sheer loneliness of her fate. He had sworn never to let a woman into his heart again. But Aelia was not Livia. She was not comfort. She was defiance, tragedy, and the constant, painful reminder of the cost of his empire. "Your father has sent new envoys," Marcus informed her softly. "They believe you are settling well into your new position. I will not disillusion them." Aelia turned. "You could have killed me. You could have destroyed my entire line. Why the restraint, General?" "Because," Marcus said, looking directly at her, admitting a truth to himself he had denied for years, "I understand the depth of a man's or a woman's duty to what they protect. You acted with honor toward your people, even if you brought treason to my house. The legacy of Rome is not merely the punishment of its enemies, Aelia, but the recognition of their dignity." He was not offering her freedom, but he was offering her a human acknowledgement she had not expected. He had transformed his grief into a shield of duty. She had transformed her duty into a weapon of resistance. Now both weapons had failed. The only way forward was to build something new from the wreckage of their expectations. Marcus did not touch her, but he left the room having made a silent, irreversible choice. He would maintain the peace, but he would do so with a vigilance tempered by the understanding that his enemy, Aelia, was also his unwilling mirror. Her tragedy was bound to his command. Milo the Libertus was quietly promoted to be the general's personal aide, bypassing the traditional bureaucratic chain. His job was no longer horses, but observation. He now stood closer to the ultimate power than any common soldier, his dignity restored not through title, but through trust earned by courage. He had saved the general, and in doing so he had saved Lyra, and secured a fragile, difficult hope for his own future under the shadow of the Empire. The burden of his secret was the new armor that protected him. Aelia remained the peace bride, forever separated by duty but bound by recognition. She was given as a strategic asset, but she became the unexpected, dangerous conscience of the general who had sworn never to love again. The frontier was calm, but the battle for Marcus Aquila's soul had just begun. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales like this one.